Hello and welcome to GovTech Viewpoints. My name is Terry Takai and I'm excited to be here with you today. We have a really interesting and different topic today. I'm joined by HP's Todd Gustafson for another interesting and fun conversation. Now, each episode of GovTech Viewpoints explores one big question that's facing state and local government decision makers as they adopt the next generation technologies. Todd and I will be breaking down the latest news and biggest trends and explain how they impact state, city, and county leaders. All right, Todd, well, let's get started today. I think we have a really interesting topic today, and I think it's very topical because so much is changing in the world of cybersecurity. I mean, we're really seeing cybersecurity move from not a conversation about specific technologies. And while zero trust and many of those terms are still important, we're really seeing that risk mitigation kinds of terminology come in because we're moving from an era of the CISO being the no person to the CISO being the person that enables technology. But it doesn't just affect the CISO, it really affects the entire infrastructure of the technology. So let's talk about that a little bit. I think we're moving away from sort of a single solution set or a single way of thinking of cybersecurity at the perimeter or protecting our data, but it has to impact all aspects of the business. So how do you think about it from an infrastructure perspective, and how do you see this really evolving in the way that you're looking at what's happening at the endpoint?
I think there's a lot of things that are happening, Terry, that are, evolving quickly, right? And our world is, changing at a precipitous pace. The one thing that I would offer that is more omnipresent than ever before is that we're in a unique situation, particularly in state and local governments, where there is a level of change that's happening driven by the administration in terms of funding priorities, funds themselves, what's happening with the Department of Education, et cetera. And as a result of that, we're having to do more with less, if that makes sense. But if there's one thing that I'd like to get across that I've learned from a lot of state leaders is that purchases are cyber decisions. You are making a security decision when you're making that. And that, in a lot of cases, runs into direct conflict in terms of trying to achieve the best possible cost, if you will, for the government and trying to make those trade-offs. And so if there was one thing that I would offer, both as a constituent, as an American, is how important it is to strike that right balance between cyber and cost savings, right? And it can be fairly detrimental, if you will, to your data approach in state and local governments. The one thing that's happening that might be a consideration for our listeners to think about is how GSA and OMB at the federal level is thinking about this as well. And one of the things that they're moving towards is a term called OneGov. And that OneGov has primarily been an emphasis on the part of the federal government to have the primes or the OEMs, better said, to be the lead, if you will, in purchases and have partners as the subs. And the primary reason, as published by the government, for doing this is that they want to have a more aggressive cyber approach with engaging with the OEMs that are developing this product, that are developing the code from a cyber standpoint. So they have closer linkages between both organizations, if you will. And I think it's an opportunity for us to at least consider and think differently about how do we approach engaging with partners, OEMs, and how that applies to budgets.
Well, I love that perspective, Todd, because you said two things in there that I want to draw out. One is that it is important. I think sometimes we only think about kind of risk mitigation when we're buying a certain type of software or when we're looking at a certain, approach. And I think as you said, thinking about it, not from the standpoint of, what risk does it impose, but also what opportunity is there in anything that we buy to enhance our cyber capability. The other thing I loved about that, really thank you for that sort of insights into what's happening at the federal government, because I was sort of looking at it more from the standpoint that, with the consolidation, if you will, for GSA to be cutting contracts, back to your cost efficiency point, that came out, but not that point about being able to work directly with the OEMs and be able to influence, kind of how you're thinking about cybersecurity. So I really like that approach. Do you think that that's going to sort of influence as you're thinking about the types of things that you go forward, maybe some of the innovation approaches that you're using? I mean, I'm asking you to kind of blue sky here.
Yeah.
But that's what we're here for with our audience.
I think for a long time, there's been an approach that a fencing mentality, if you will, right. That if we create a multi-layered fence approach, that no matter what happens inside that fence, it's contained and isn't exposed. But what I would say is, you think about what's happening with these bad nation-state actors that wake up every day thinking about how they can create harm, wreak havoc, steal your data. It's so important, and we've talked about this before, on having a multi-layered approach. And what I would say is that what I would encourage our listeners to think about is how endpoints are a critical part of it, right? So you have endpoint, you have the network infrastructure, the security layers that are in between that. But simple little things like, what happens if your device is lost? What happens if your device is powered off? Are you able to, as an example, remotely communicate with that device using a very narrow band and wipe that device even when it's powered off remotely? So if the device is lost, your data is protected because it's wiped. How do you, equally important, if there is an intrusion, how do you get your team members back up and going quickly without having to engage a carrier to ship stuff back and forth and do all these kind of things? And so what I would say is, the industry, I think, is quickly evolving to kind of figure out each one of these layers in this old school mentality of a ring around the network and everything safe inside. Might not be the best approach.
Well, I think it's also evolving, Todd, because you and I have talked before about, as we see compute moving around, if you will. We went from sort of compute at the edge when we were talking client server. I date myself here. And then, into thinking about cloud. And now with AI, we're thinking about a much more distributed compute power, even as we're talking about mega data centers. So I think that really blends into what your conversation is, which is, with this kind of shift, which happens in our industry, at the same token, we've got to be thinking about all aspects of that as we think about cyber. And I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes we get fixated on one area and we're not thinking more holistically.
It is every single day. I am amazed, Terry, because I try to keep myself well-read, well-educated, and perhaps this capacity is reaching its maximum capacity, because the pace of how AI is impacting how we think about security from a data perspective, in terms of protecting our data, not just the intrusion part of it, but competitively what could happen, or what could happen to constituents if that was out. And I think that's a natural next step in our conversation, in terms of what are those things that you should be thinking about, and how AI can be an enabler, but also a risk, right? And it transcends hardware and is more of an approach than it is a software perspective. And I think that's a next step for us, if you will, if you think in our conversation about how we can apply that those OEMs that are driving this hardware and software approach into applicability in states and local governments.
Well, Todd, that's a great segue to our next speaker, who's going to talk more about the impact from a cybersecurity perspective on how you think about data. Thank you, Todd, for a really interesting and exciting conversation about the role of cybersecurity and the role of the CISO as we move forward in innovation. And now I'm really excited to invite Dr. Tommy Gardner to join me. Tommy is the Chief Technology Officer for HP Federal. So Tommy, this is really exciting. We kind of start the conversation off with Todd, and then we're able to move on and kind of go that one step deeper into the conversation. So Tommy, when we left it with Todd, we were really starting to have a conversation about data and how the Chief Information Security Officer really thinks about data, but especially thinking about data as we're moving into this era of AI, where really, in many ways, data is king. So what are you seeing out there, Tommy, in terms of the role of the CISO, how the CISO is actually using data, but also how the CISO has to take a role in prepping the organization to be able to utilize data as they move into this era of AI?
No, thanks, Terry, and it's good to see you again. I can say the role of the CISO has changed over just the last year to 2 years. And what you're seeing is cybersecurity has always been a team effort, and the CISO's always been involved. But now the CISOs in most organizations are being seen as peers to the CIO and equals to the chief data officers, which is where the data belongs, under the CDO. And what's important here is the CISO used to think, my job is to protect data and don't let anybody run away with it. Don't let it exfiltrate. And if I've done that, I've done my job. But now they've come to understand, because the use of AI and the quality of the output from an AI algorithm depends on the quality of data, that their job is not just to protect the data, but to validate it, to verify it, to make sure the pedigree of the data is something that can be relied upon. And so it's almost like a zero trust perspective, that you have a philosophy is, if we're going to trust the data, what's the foundation? What's the first principle? What is the reason and the pedigree that you can cause you to trust the source of the data and the quality of the data? And now when it's used in a format, AI has its own issues of bias, of privacy, and of the actual transparency that it has. But the CISO can help make that an answerable questions, where you can actually have faith in the data that you're using. You will have faith in the output of your AI systems.
We've seen a lot of changes. Tommy, you mentioned some of them, but the role of the chief data officer has, sometimes they have a lot of authority, sometimes they don't have a lot of authority. And I think that that's changing in terms of people understanding that they need to be able to have and take actionable steps. But with that, they do have this new relationship with the CISOs in being almost the kind of combined authority, or the combined capability to really help an organization understand their data and protect their data, and then also be able to move forward. Is that something that you're seeing out there?
I see it both in industry and in government and even in academia. And usually the academics are ahead of the game because they think about this all the time. But in this case, it's universal. The CISO is finding out that people listen to him. They treat him like an authority. And I believe the cause of this is the boards of the organization, or the oversight for the organization, is demanding that the leader, the CEO in industry, or the general or admiral in the military, or even the head of the agency, it knows that they have responsibilities and they have a necessity to be able to explain to their constituents how they're treating cybersecurity. And so they're listening to the CISO because, in general, the CISO knows more than anybody else on the team. And they realize when the CISO says, hey, we have some priorities and we're not funding them, they've got to take one of two methods. Either stop funding something else and fund the CISO's priorities, or go find more money. But to ignore is peril for the organization. And so it's a good lesson that the CISO now has a voice, but because of those funding issues, they have real power in the organization to create change, create innovation, and to do things the right way.
But some CISOs, now I'm sure you've known a few, Tommy, kind of prefer to be a little bit in the background and a little bit in the back room running things and making things happen. But I'm thinking that they really do need to think about some different skills, the communication skills, some of those things that they're going to need to maybe do a little bit differently to be able to do all of the things you've just described.
Yeah, it's a strategic mindset. You have to have a vision of where the organization is going, and you have to understand the tools that you have available to you under AI or IT or in types of the data stack that can help you get to where you want to go. And the new software that is coming out, and the number I read or heard quoted was $20 billion of venture capital funds in writing software for AI and for AI applications. So we have some really fascinating and terrific AI machines. And AI is defined, the standard to call a machine AI is just running 50 tops, teraflops per second. That's just, I used to work high performance computing when I was in the Navy, and I couldn't even imagine a Cray machine coming close to that. And yet, and those type of things are in my little, 2-pound laptop today. And the great news is next year it's going to be even better, maybe an order of magnitude better. We'll find out. But the ability to process at that speed, and it gives you tools that today you think of as Copilot or of a Chat GPT-5. But with $20 billion invested in software development, we're going to have tools a year from now we can't even think of today, that is just in the twinkle in the eye of a developer somewhere in Silicon Valley. And that's the beauty. And the analogy I give is when you first came out with smartphones in the communication sector, I didn't want one. I thought I can call everybody I know on my little flip phone. Why would I want to pay extra for a smartphone? What's the big deal? And then the banking app came out. Oh, gee, I can check my account. And then the Find My Friends came out where I can know where my 2 teenage children are at any time of the day. And you start getting all these other apps from the app development store. The one I use daily is my gaming app. Because since I got to HP, I've gotten into these multiplayer games. And, I don't know how I would live without a smartphone today. And within a year, nobody had a flip phone. Everybody had a smartphone. And Terry, that's the way it's going to be with the AI computers. When the software starts running, everybody's going to run to the store and buy an AI computer, and they're going to buy the fastest one they can find so it can run the hottest app.
Yeah. How do you think, Tommy, I'm going to have you put your kind of future wizard hat on. And, we know that the cybersecurity organizations have been probably the earliest adopters. really, of artificial intelligence, really around getting in the SOCs to get a common operating picture, to be able to parse through all of the data that they deal with. But if we were to look forward and think about this future that you just were talking about, what are some of the things that the CISOs are going to have to think about, they're going to incorporate into their toolkits going forward?
Well, I'm a big fan of Jen Easterly, who just left as the assistant director, and a West Point graduate. Being from the Naval Academy, I know what she went through and all her classmates did, and just getting to where they are today. And I think her experience in the financial sector really helped her there, because it was critical for the stability of our financial sector to have the best cybersecurity. And I think some of the leading edge tactics and techniques in that field used AI because they could afford nothing but the best in that field. And that's dwindling down to the rest of industry. It's infusing itself in government. And I think the CISOs are going to have to learn the details of AI. And it's not a monolith. If you really look at AI, there are 32 different branches on that tree. And you need to be able to understand what is different about each branch you go on, the 15 different types of machine learning, the various types of natural language processing. And I started AI 50 years ago when it was weighted algorithms and expert systems. We are far beyond those two. Agentic and generic AI, we're getting to the point where we're close to artificial superintelligence. So ASI, I think that's where the CISO should be learning, where the AI learns and trains itself. The DARPA Cyber Challenge is probably a first step in that direction. But where I'm trying to lead my research and my studies is in quantum AI, the quantum information system, not just the quantum computer, but the broader field of quantum systems, quantum communication, quantum true random number generator, quantum puffs, or previously unclonable functions. Those fields are progressing so fast. If matched with the AI advances, we're going to have orders of magnitude improvement in our system. And that's where the CISOs have to keep their eye and their ears open and make sure that they have investment funds ready to get to the next level. Because you bet the adversaries are going to get there, and they're going to be threatening our systems if we're not keeping up.
Well, Tommy, what a fascinating conversation. I'm going to end on that note because I think it's a great kind of a action call for those that are listening. So thank you, Tommy, for being on with us. Thank you, Todd, for kicking off this conversation. And we'll see you again soon.